Why could they not understand what he was with his child's mind had grasped with such certitude? But let us return to the story of his childhood. He displayed great gifts for trade. At 8, he was selling pots unaided. Deniably. Chairman fully relied on him. And during the torrid hours of the bazaar, he gave himself up to peaceful relaxation in some chaykhana. الوقت تشاشتي خيلي كي ديروا بارم زياد مشيت إقرار مرة ديبو شيخانا مشيت نصرالدين ما راف فينا المفاهمة. Nasreddin plied a brisk trade and never once did the old man have cause to rue the trust he placed in him. One day, when the boy was alone in the shop, a merchant came in and selected a small pot. Like this, for buying honey in. Glancing at the huge tannoors standing in a row, each of which was twice the size of its seller, the merchant remarked, "Gufta, the pots are big, the seller is a mite." Nasreddin instantly turned these words into the first line of a couplet and supplied the second with his answer. The buyer is big, but he buys slight. The pots are big, the seller is a mite. The buyer is big, but he buys slight. Amazed and delighted at such a display of sprightly wit, the merchant, who himself composed verses in his leisure, and was a good judge in those matters, bought 5 more pots from the boy and paid for them generously without haggling. Nasreddin bid the merchant good day with another couplet. Though his pot from common clay be set, may it hold for you the taste of sherbet. Whereat the merchant fairly shook his delight, and he even went to the pains of writing down both couplets. Thanks to which they have survived to this day. He was a true son of the bazaar. The hub, the bustle, and the crush never wearied him. He could swim in this unending, noisy torrent for days on end. It was at the bazaar that there occurred to him an incident, which had no little effect in revealing to him his own mind and heart. Event very important. Who are you, bhai? One afternoon, he strayed into Old Camel Square, Bazar Ustura, Charai Ustur. It was a slack hour, when both sellers and buyers were waiting for the heat to pass. All around lay camels. Saturating the hot, motionless air with acrid odor of their sweat. Little Nasreddin fearlessly crossed the square, disappearing at one moment amid the smelly, yellow, petrified waves of camel humps, to bob up the next with his red tasseled velvet skull cap. The somnolent square held no attraction for him. He tried to tease a baby camel, but it was so drowsy with the heat that it merely looked at him apathetically and turned away, refusing to spit. وذاك جاي ديك تشتري شتورة كم ورقة ميخاس بازيك أنا ومزي ولا كاتو. إيه ليفت ده ما بازينا أنا قرمية. After a moment's reflection, little Nasreddin bent his steps towards Tamerlane Bridge, where newly arrived rope walkers were said to have made their pitch. As he was passing a large caravanserai, he stopped at the sound of shouting, squeals and laughter. His heart rejoicing with them, he hastened thither. He saw a crowd of bazaar boys of his own age, giving themselves up enthusiastically to a cruel sport. An old beggar woman, a gypsy of the Luli tribe. The Luli tribe, the most despised of all gypsy tribes, was sitting in the hot sun by the roadside, leaning against the wall of the caravanserai. The boys, laughing and making faces, were teasing her. Shouting out all kinds of insulting names and throwing clods of dry earth at her. The old hag was very ugly and repellent, white, bald patches showed through her uncovered hair. Very specific. Yellow fangs stuck out in her mouth behind the blue flabby lips. Her nose was hooked and livid, her eyelids inflamed, red and bare of eyelashes. Her eyes were round and wicked. Moreover, she held in her lap a cat, as repulsive as she herself was. A black, scabby cat, almost hairless with age. In a word, she was a real witch. One of those frightful witches who steal little children in order to drink their blood. Little Nasreddin lost no time. Joining in the general sport, he yelled and squealed, he growled and barked like a dog. He hopped about on one foot with his tongue sticking out, vying with the rest of them. The old hag cursed and shook her bony fist. The cat spat and arched its back. And altogether it was so funny that the boys went into fits of laughter. At last, wearied of the old woman, Mandashran, and besides, other diversions awaited them at Tamerlane Bridge. Bridge as puli Temur Asteriga. And so off they scampered at breakneck speed. Arriving there safely and just in time for the rope walking spectacle. The old hag and her cat were instantly forgotten. Indeed, who could remember them when one's ears were filled to aching with deafening din of drums? Large and small, with a piercing whistle of pipes and the blare of trumpets, while one's eyes were filled with the blissful sight of the rope walkers strolling about under the sky with their long poles. Only once, like a dim fleeting shadow, did the thought of the old woman pass before little Nasreddin to vanish immediately, catching oddly at the heart in passing as if leaving a scratch in it. This bliss continued all day. Nasreddin returned home a different way and did not see the old hag as the Garara. But in relating to Sher Mamad the events of the day, he recollected her and faltered. Lekin Shauki pe Sher Mamad qissa muna biya chama tamam gaba. Well, why do you stop? Said Sher Mamad. I saw an old woman of the Luli, a beggar woman, answered Nasreddin. She had a black cat, and then we went to Timberlane Bridge. He did not tell a direct lie, but neither did he tell the truth. It was a half-truth, which is really the worst kind of a lie. Nimras بسیار خطرناک. It was half-truth, which is really the worst kind of a lie. Once more, something scratched at his heart. With this, he went to bed, fatigued by his busy day. He quickly fell asleep. He awoke in the middle of the night from a terrifying dream. The old hag with an evil leer chased him. Seized him, and dragged him off to a pit, wherein a huge black cat with fiery eyes prowled about, snarling and spitting. This dream haunted the boy and filled him with a strange yearning. Listening to Sher Mamad's sighs and snores, he felt twinges of increasing pain within him. As if the old woman's cat had got into his breast and was sharpening his claws upon his heart. Thus, for the first time, he heard the voice of conscience. And learned that he carried within him invisible scales upon which was weighed every sign of evil done by him. And the dipping of these scales caused him acute distress. To rid himself of that scratching at the heart, he tried to divert his thoughts to games, to the hedgehog, to swallows, but in vain. Wishing not to think of the old woman, he could not think of aught else. And then a strange thing happened. The deeper he became engrossed in the thought of the old woman, the less did he remain himself and the more did he become the old woman. As if he were emptying himself into her, so that by dawn he was 3/4 her and only 1/4 his old self. And when he had become 3/4 her, he felt as unhappy, as lonely as she did. He say, Azuki the tasubra ki manezi, I mean, mood is utarishna, was on mo qadam tanha, on mo qadar ghamgin, ehsas makat kyu ehsas makat. While the quarter that was still him was filled with such poignant pity for her that shed hot tears. ودمو یک حصہ از 4 حصہ یک شی نال خود نصرالدین منده از او حساب که سوی قدر عالی دل چه موسوزه ای قدر کی بیخین داغ داغ اشک میریزه. He understood all now. The infinite loneliness. مکمل تنهایی. The infinite misery of her who had not a soul in the world to befriend her. یک نفر نہیں ایک سنو زوم تو مہربان چل کنا یا دوست چنال زوم تو اندازہ. Was it her fault that she had been born in the Luli tribe? Alu Hazara ہے کچھ کار مطلب لولی ہے کچھ کار دے دیگا. Hazara بودن جرم است مگر. اینجی لولی بودن جرم است. دزو tribe تو پیداش نه بس باید تو که است باید لعنت ملامت شد. جیپسی خو نورمالی مردم خوش نمایا خانه بدوشا. اونا بسیار آزاد سپیریت دیگه کاراکتر قد شار و قد سیتل پیپل کوئی ازنا نہیں ملے گا. اینا وحشی ہے. صحرائی ہے نا سپیریٹ صحرائی ہے. نیٹیو امریکنز ہو رہی نیٹیو آسٹریلینز ہو رہی. مرغ فارمی ہے نا. Anyhow, was it her fault that she had been born in the Luli tribe? Was it she who had made herself ugly? Then why must she suffer lifelong punishment for it? اگر قصور از اون نیه از اون چرا عمر تمام عمر باید زی مصیبت و زی سزا تیر کنم. The multitudinous bazaar all around was a desert to her. چقدر دمانی بازار خلقه لندن والا ملبورن والا یا چمست نا. How many people? But there you were feeling like that gypsy woman. And nobody likes you, nobody wants you, everybody's going their own way. Millions of people going and coming, not lifting. Her nay, worse, for it was filled for her with scorn and enmity. Wherefore? خالی کو هستا هستا لیکن پور از لعنت و ملامت هم هستا نا. چرا؟ She was always bent as she always looked around fearfully. ازی قدر چور شده که همیشه انتصل because she always expected a blow. که از اینجا خوردم که از اینجا خوردم. قلوخ ما سنگ ما چو ما by whip, by word or by laughter. مسخره یک دو. The black cat was all that she had in the world. And so they lived together, both old, infirm, forever hungry, destitute, having naught but each other in the whole wide world. غير الزقدية خد هيك كسرة. درم بشغل. إير نصرالدين خان. With what eyes? Now that he understood this, did he look upon himself, upon his shameful, mocking grimaces. Did he kar kada? Kaze usto gat khorda, bole zo maskara kada. His disgraceful shouted insults and his hopping about on one foot with his tongue stuck out. He was horrified. He found the sight of himself so shameful and disgusting that he could not bear it, and bit his head deep under his pillow with a loud groan. Morning found him sad and thoughtful. Hastily eating a bread cake and drinking some milk, he ran off to the bazaar. In his girdle lay a purse filled with small coppers, making up 2.5 tanga altogether, the fruit of wise thrift. Some might think, nay, gambling, luck. He hastened to the old woman. How many bizarre temptations lay in the path? Iron, honey, snow, sugar candy, halwa, ये ना तमाम दरोई शमात मगर ना वे चीज़ें नहीं मिल रही और पैदा को खातर he manfully conquered them all मर्द वरियाज़ में नहीं तमाम स्टेज वे चीज़ नहीं and did not untie his purse strings. Neither did he stop in the street where the boys were rapturously playing a Chinese game. एक जाए माया के बच्चा तमाम Chinese game बा उन जमिस्ता ना शुद्ध. The name of Lianga, for stakes amounting to 1/4 of a farthing per nose. Little Nasreddin had no equal in this game. And yet, he passed by with a quickened step, glancing aside. Game the favorite games. Move ram. He found the old woman in her old place by the caravan sarai. The cat was lying in her lap. The earthenware crock for alms was empty, like the day before. The old woman was stroking the cat and speaking to it. And the cat answered with a piteous mewing. No doubt it was hungry. Little Nasreddin concealed himself, behind the gap of a broken wall. He suddenly felt timorous. Man Temurun, Temuri Jahan Gusha, Manam Temuri Jahan Gusha. How was he to approach the old woman? What was he to say? An idea occurred to him to toss her the purse and run away. But that did not befit the solemnity of the moment. Serious much. All kinds of people passed the old woman along the road, but none gave her a copper. Not even a crust of stale bread. Nasreddin looked and wondered how unjust and hard-hearted Chagar zalim or sangdil asta mardum. His wonder waxed into indignation. People kept passing by and passing by. But still the old woman's crock remained empty. The blood rushed to the face of little Nasreddin. Why could they not understand what he was with his child's mind had grasped with such certitude? Today, he had no eye, either for the old woman's livid nose or her yellow fangs, for his mental vision had risen above such irrelevant and inconsequential details and probed below the surface to the underlying essential core. The asli gabras dabud yani helplessness, becharagi, loneliness, tanhai and suffering. Dard, gham, و احساس کرد چیز نزدیک دروازه غمم شده بود. Moved by anger and compassion. ولی دو جذبه یا غضب گرفته او را یا کسته و رحم گرفته. He overcame his timidity. شرم مرمش گم شد ترشم گم شد. And purse in hand advanced towards him. The nearer he came, the more difficult he was going. His feet seemed to be sticking to the ground. She had recognized him. Why is he mistaken? He could tell by the strained, guarded look in her eyes. She shrank and drew her head over her shoulders, expecting from him stones or verbal insults as yesterday. Here, Grandma, take this. He mumbled with faltering tongue, emptying his purse straight into her lap and showering copper coins over the spitting cat. Here, his courage failed him. That he had passed the bounds of his spirit's bravery. Turning, he fled. And ceased not his retreat until he reached the hardware row far from the caravanserai. Having performed his deed of penance, he pondered the whole day thereafter. He pondered in seclusion, the tanhai. His thoughts ran in two rows. One concerned the old woman, the other the hard-hearted people. یک طرف زن ये मजलूम खातून फिर आजा एक तरफ खल्क़ आलम संगदिल شده एमी दो चीज़ कश के तरह इधर जोर ना माय who refused her aid. He pitied the one and was indignant with the other. एक तरफ से रहम श्यामत तरफ अजी तरफ अजी खैली गज़ब से बालजद. But he would have proved unworthy of his great destiny had he confined himself to pity and indignation alone. लेकिन अगर ये मुझे खाम मन फकत दमज़ो बग़ज़ी खल्क़ व रहम दिली तरफ ऐसी मज़लूम अगर दम मुझे इस्ताद मशुद ये दिक्कत दज़ी तक़दीर खुने मेरे सुध की मरोज़ मोर बिशना से. Action was called for. सिर्फ आज कार्श दो नहीं चला यार रहम दिली शुदो. Action was required. Action was called for, but what kind of action? कार को बायद शुना मतलब what शुना? It was here, for the first time, that he discovered the true capacities of his mind. To begin with, he detached his thoughts from his feelings. Of the red head, idhar ho jao, white head, idhar ho jao. Mix na kar do. कार तो हमदा कुछ करने नहीं आ रही, thinking ना नहीं. Red head जायज़ बेल ना. To begin with, first thing with the Bismillah, he detached his thoughts from his feelings, in order that the latter should not hurry the former. متأثر ना करना ख्यालात से. Then he brought the tangled skein of his thoughts into orderly array by simplifying them to the greatest possible degree and disposing them by right of seniority. ترتيب مدينة له. In the order in which they were born. He learned this method of cogitation on his little chessboard by studying the puzzles which he often saw in the chaikhana at the bazaar. There are forced moves in chess, which one is obliged to make against one's will. يقول مو بس forced move أنا وايد نشور بخرب كنا فردام شيء زدام شيء ورام forced move. There are forced moves in chess, which one is obliged to make مجبور مشا against one's will because one is impelled thereto by one's opponent. حریف زود رو مجبور منا कि वो एक चाला बिजना कि वो माना न रहो खाली बरे बचावा. This is what little Nasreddin decided upon. फैसला कर. If the populace of Bukhara were not charitable of their own accord, अगर इना खैरात और सदक़ात ज़्यादा रफ्ता है, they would have to be made so. In thus defining his task, he also defined the channel in which his further reflections would flow. The drift of them was this: to discover a game in which he would have the ascendancy over the men of Bukhara. Kudam game ki mane zuma tamam bali tamam Bukhara tab basho. Game ko paida na ho. Task, creative task ko paida na. Hima chikar kare mina bayad bida. Mina khairat na mida, sadqat na mida, zakat na mida. Magar bayad bida. Chirqam bida inali ra Nasreddin jorna. The drift of them was this. In conclusion of all these thoughts was this: to discover a game. Paidaku ter game in which he would have the ascendancy in baladasti over the men of Bukhara. Kech kas baydur girnak nariyo. Hadaf mushakhas shud. To avoid bothering his mind with the thousands of hard-hearted Bukhara inhabitants. قلت यार अगर मैं ये خو तमाम इतना संग दिला इधर खो करूँ माँ खो बेखुरमी करूँ ना माँ टेंशन ना मिलूँ दिया चमायं ख्वास शुदा. To avoid bothering his mind with the thousands of hard-hearted Bukhara inhabitants, he deemed it wise to merge them all together in his mind into one big Bukhara man. طول تمام من mind خويك Bukhara man جورنم full big man. بزي تمام يسنجدلي زي توتال نمشى يرجمع كده من يزي man بزي رينج ميلو. كما قصدي deal كنا مالي. thousands زال ما يشتو deal كنا مدير. Things were thus simplified. كار خرسادك. To think of one Bukhara man. يا هدف. Albeit a very big one. خيرك كتاية. مگر ياك دنا خواستن. معلوم كده. Proved a much easier task. Nasreddin applied himself to studying the nature of that so heartless big one. Bazur the study fish. Nasreddin applied himself to studying the nature, fitrat, of that so heartless big one for the purpose of discovering a crack in the shield with which the aforesaid big Bukhara man covers his mind and his heart against the penetration of charity and compassion. Wo shield, separchia. Cameramen met girifta. Kijk dana crack mane zunia. Kaz mane zuya go sadqa ego khairat am tadarbaya. The inner essence of the Bukhara man proved to fall far short of the abysmal. زلت زيرك calculate كتقول بزيار زليل كيفيته character. تمام خلق represent كمان وياك نفر. It did not take the boy more than 2 or 3 hours of cogitation to plumb its depths, and there at the bottom to discover the evil-smelling slime of avarice. انتهاء the مقاري chai zillat kiraf kimanezi deo mujasta dit kimanezu gandhi avarice, the shells of stinginess and the rotting weeds of ineradicable self-love. خود پسندی حسد کا گندگی گفت تمام شدانو منج پیدا کر تمہیں shit hole بود خود پسندی کے shit hole بود. The big Bukhara man was now so clear to him that he could envisage him even with his inward eye in all his foul and hideous aspect. قد چی میدونن خود تمام شرمین کرنا X-ray ملا big man of Bukhara شناخت تشخيص. In stature he could have vied with a minaret. Size تقدر एक minaret. Except that he was much thicker. The girdle round his waist could barely meet. He was fat and ruddy, with plump cheeks and deep-set little eyes that looked out upon the world dully and listlessly. A smug, vacuous smile wandered sleepily over his face, and when he opened his lips, one divined rather than saw behind them a thick, awkward, lisping tongue. He was continually puffing, sighing and grunting from the excess of fat that had accumulated within him. He held in his hand a huge bread cake, the size of a wagon wheel, smeared with honey, and when he took bites from it, he moaned and purred in a swooning ecstasy, shielding himself with his elbow and glancing around to see whether anyone was going to take the bread cake away from him or ask him for a piece. Little Nasreddin was angry with the people of Bukhara for being so callous towards the old woman, and that is why the big Bukhara man appeared to him in such a repulsive sight. Anger, however, is a poor counselor of fairness. अगर तुम्हें खाए इंसाफ सुनाई बता, कार के इस्तख़ूब काज़ी नहीं है. Indeed, there was little justice in such a notion. ची इंसाफ हमने से. Since the real people of Bukhara were in their vast majority, अक्सरियत public in Bukhara, good and kind-hearted. बड़ा मेहरबान बुदा. They refused the old woman aid. अगर वो मतलब बेचारा अगर कोमक ना मकात, not through abysmal self-love, इसे खातिर ना कि उन्हें कलो खुद पसंद है, but rather because they were unable. ना मितना खुदों चाल चीज़ों का खराब है. Through her outward ugliness to see the full depths of her inner suffering, but if they had, they would have helped her themselves without being compelled hereto. They simply lacked the gift of deep thought. You know, fakiri farhangiya. Chort chikastas, matlab sathi hai. Deep thought nadran. Ehsaas chi khaw rafta hai. Ehsaasaj khaw rafta. The boy had no time to think of this. However, he was preparing himself to grappling with the big Bukhara man, and consequently conceived for him in advance a great contempt and wrath, as is always the case in every struggle. Now, this is the beginning of struggle. He's found out the big Bukhara man. In our baz kam balance ka dakhal ko istemal kar. تمام خود نمیتونیم ببینن تمام از اینا خود پسند است اینا تمام خود پرست هستن بعضی نه اصلا دزی فکرایش نیه احساس نه بخی down to that aware نیه بیخبرن غافلن مگر او بیگ بخارا من رو پیدا کرده کتیر ماین علیشتن نیه. After scrutinizing the shield of Big Bukhara Man, little Nasreddin quickly discovered therein its most glaring crack. Shieldam paida kat, manezu chagiram paida kat. Among the various foibles, Himakatha, Besariya, Chapkariya ki Khalqi, Big Brother Man was burdened with, his greatest was an idle curiosity. Kalantarin khislati zidevi ki represent na tamam khalq ra. Kiyali ruburi Nasreddin hai na. Idle curiosity. E lagoi. Pas gab gashto. Idle curiosity and an insatiable admiration for all outlandish wonders. Zahir bini. یعنی دو چیز پیدا کرد کی problem is here. The thing was to strike at this crack. in الاصل قصه هي कि يعني مين strike كده idle curiosity خاصية زيها ما ادري ايش تادي قال لي انتو لا يلا قفتر هي وزور ما وزور قفتر هي بس بال مش مش بس بعض يلا هي مثلا سبيش كو يا قال بالفيسبوك كانوا تنقنا بالفيسبوك. Now the thing was to strike at the